Hi, welcome back to my channel, all about book summaries. We are doing How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. We are still in part 3, chapter 18, and it's titled How to Read Philosophy. Okay, so you should expect this to be dense, and it is. Okay, not so much in my summary. Okay, it was, yeah, it's pretty reasonable. But in the actual book, and this is understandable, right? Mortimer J. Adler is a philosopher himself. He's written many books for the everyday person on philosophy. He has a book titled Aristotle for Everyone, and others, I'm sure. So yeah, if you're especially interested in philosophy, I really recommend buying the whole book and reading this section. Anyway, I've done my best here to give you the meat of it. Okay, so philosophy starts in childhood, at least the aspect of philosophy that has to do with wonder and the asking of profound questions. Children, however, cannot answer such questions. They can only ask them. It takes a special kind of person, a special type of adult, to pose childlike questions yet come up with adult answers. Asking the right questions serves a dual purpose. It forces one to become a more active reader or listener, you know what you're targeting, and it helps one to recognize answers when they do reveal themselves. Okay, so asking merely for information is not enough. Why types of questions are also important, and these are noticeably missing in most school curricula. They teach us the what in school, right? What is this, and when do you use it? Rarely do they tell us why, right? Why are you learning this or that? So questions of this type aid us in reaching simple distinctions to otherwise complicated phenomena. Okay, not unlike science and math, most modern philosophers do not write for the general public, okay, but for other experts. So in that case, in that regard, they're not unlike science and math writers, unfortunately. So when attempting to read philosophy, you need to keep in mind that there are first order questions, those that deal with what is or what happens, and second order questions, queries concerning the language used to express first order questions, among other concerns. Okay, and I've taken paraphrased this from page 276. Okay, modern, so post 1930 philosophers tend to tackle second order questions, which are difficult for non philosophers. Okay, remember, second order questions are questions concerning the language used to express first order questions. And first order questions are questions that deal with what is or what happens. Ideally, and at least when starting out, a reader should opt for philosophy books dealing with first order questions. Okay, especially in the case of philosophy, I really, really, really recommend that you start chronologically, right? Start from the ancient Greeks and, and move from there. Anyway, when reading a book on philosophy, it's important to be aware of the philosophical method. Briefly stated, philosophers cannot experiment or devise questionnaires, okay? Basically, all they have is their mind. They can merely think. They do not guess, they do not speculate, but think profoundly. And their experiences can be understood by anyone who has been alive long enough. So, if experiences are the same for everyone or can be acquired by anyone, what's the difference between a philosopher and a non philosopher? Simply put, the philosopher has usually spent a great deal of time contemplating a certain conundrum. There may be one philosophical method, but there are 5 common philosophical styles, at least in the Western world. And here they are. A. The philosophical dialogue. The chief exponent of this style was Plato, and he used it to marvelous effect. Okay. However, he was arguably the only one to use it effectively, at least according to Adler, though others have tried. So at once you see its limitation, right? It's very effective, but only in the hands of a few. B. The philosophical treatise or essay. This style would not be unfamiliar to anyone who's finished high school or even middle school. The philosopher states a problem, And the paper goes through a beginning, middle, and end in an attempt to answer that problem. Some philosophers include counterpoints made by both lay people and other philosophers. C. The meeting of objections. Okay, this is a style honed by Thomas Aquinas. It was introduced in the Middle Ages and essentially straddles the major facets of the previous styles, that of posing questions and responding to counter-arguments. So he sort of took from both. Here's a quote from the book. The idea that the truth somehow evolves out of opposition and conflict was a common medieval one, page 283. And Aquinas, embraced this outlook. Okay, this D, the systemization of philosophy. This system was the brainchild of two notable 17th century philosophers, René Descartes and Baruch Spinoza. Okay, I don't know his last name. Inspired by the orderliness of math, they sought to organize philosophy in a similar manner to the way math is structured. This style, especially in Spinoza's case, was short-lived and it's situational at best, right? I mean, math is math, philosophy is philosophy. Okay, the final one, E, the aphoristic style. An aphorism is, I quote from dictionary.com, a terse saying embodying a general truth or astute observation. Okay, this mostly Eastern style was adopted by Friedrich Nietzsche and others in the 19th century. The advantage of this style is that the reader does most of the work, okay, since the sayings are so short that it forces one to dig further. That having been said, this brevity is at once the appeal and the weak point of this style. It robs the reader of the ability to follow the philosopher's train of thought, and hence there's little to build on or argue against. And so these are the predominant styles of philosophy, very briefly. Okay, let's move on. Knowing the author's problem or problems is usually a priority in any text, at least in expository works. But this point requires reiteration in the case of philosophy. Philosophers may explicitly or implicitly state what it is they wish to tackle, but in either case, you as a reader must be aware of what is being discussed. Okay? If you're not, you're gonna be lost. And it's, there's no point in reading a work of philosophy if you don't know what the philosopher is tackling. A reader needs, in addition, to be aware of a philosopher's controlling principles, or what major aspect of his or her philosophy is taken for granted or assumed. Also, keep in mind that even the most competent philosophers tend to be inconsistent in applying their own controlling principles. More often than not, these are implicit rather than explicit, and it's important to keep an open mind when searching for them, even when, or perhaps especially when, they contradict your own assumptions. Here's another pertinent quote from the book, taken from pages 289 and 290. It is a good mental exercise to pretend that you believe something you really do not believe. And the clearer you are about your own prejudgments, the more likely you will be not to misjudge those made by others. End quote. When reading philosophy, it is especially tempting to resort to summaries and the like. Okay? However, these will almost always fall short, in the sense that they will not offer the satisfaction that comes from reading and rereading such texts and arriving at your own conclusions. When writing a philosophical work, an author does nothing but think, relying on his or her own experiences and the power of the intellect. Therefore, and not only as a matter of courtesy, a reader should also engage in deep thinking and not pluck ready-made answers. I quote, "Taking the opinions of others is not solving philosophical questions, but evading them." Page 291. One other important thing to note is that philosophers, although they use everyday speech, do so in a particular way. Just because you know a word or think you know it does not mean that your work is finished. Philosophers use common words in a way that suits their philosophy or argument, and it is imperative that one takes special care when understanding these terms. Also, keep in mind that philosophers have engaged in conversation with each other, so to speak, for centuries. It would do you good to read chronologically arguments on a specific topic. At the very least, Read more than one philosopher's take on a matter before coming to a conclusion. Do not be put off by major disagreements between them. Some matters are unsolvable, and by noting these disagreements, you will become more aware of them. Furthermore, whether they agree or disagree is how do I put this? Is besides the point. Okay, let's put it that way. Okay, it shouldn't matter to you. You need to reach your own conclusions. Okay, with that, the summary of this chapter ends, and we now move on to the next chapter where we talk about social science.